Welcome to Wild Worcestershire, the podcast from Worcestershire Wildlife Trust. Each episode will explore the wild corners of our county. From ancient woodlands to whispering wetlands, along the way we'll meet the people working to protect these places and uncover the hidden lives of the wildlife that calls them home. This is a space for stories, for connection and for celebrating nature right on our doorstep. So come with us and discover the wild side of Worcestershire. Hello and welcome to the Wild Worcestershire podcast from Worcestershire Wildlife Trust. I'm your host Lee Robinson, and today you find me at the gateway to Droppingwell Farm, where I'm about to begin a walk across the landscape that's right at the very start of its journey. Now at first glance it's pretty simple. There's some open ground in front of me, a rough track leading on, and there's not much to give away what this place is slowly becoming. But that's exactly why I'm here, because Droppingwell Farm isn't a finished nature reserve, it's a work in progress, part of a much bigger vision to restore one of Worcestershire's rarest and most threatened habitats. So in a moment I'll be meeting with Andy Harris, who is the Northern Reserves Officer for the Trust, and together we'll be walking this site and exploring how this former farmland is being transformed. And as we go, we'll trace that journey from where we're standing now, at the very beginning, through to places like Blackstone Farm Fields, where restoration has been underway for years, and on again to the Devil's Spittleful, where that vision is already alive in the landscape. The thing is, what's happening here is not just about one field, it's about connecting different parts of a landscape back together again. So let's head on through the gate and see where this journey begins. So can I get you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Andy Harris, I'm the Northern Reserves Officer and I manage this wonderful site.
Okay. So to start us off, can you describe where we are, where we're standing today actually, and why this landscape is so special within Worcestershire?
Yeah, we're in part of the Sandscapes and this is Droppingwell Farm and we're adjacent to the Devil's Spittleful Heathland, and it's part and parcel of a really large heathland complex in the Wyre Forest District.
Right, okay. So the Worcestershire sandlands are often described as one of the country's or the county's rarest habitats. What exactly is heathland and why is it so important?
Yeah, heathland is one of the oldest landscapes in the country, along with grasslands and woodlands, but heathlands particularly suffered over time, sort of over 90% loss of sites. Very little has survived, as a lot of it has either been built on, converted into farmland or forested. It's a bit of a miracle that some has survived here as well.
Right, so you've obviously got some that is already heathland over the other side of the railway track, you were saying, and obviously at the moment we're standing in a field looking up at a hill and a bit of woodland, but all of this is going to be turned back to heathland eventually. Is that sort of the plan of action for it?
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah, so a lot of this farmland was heathland 150 years ago, and small parts of it were still heathland in the late 1970s as well, and then just gradually modern agriculture has meant that the farm's been improved and the heathlands disappeared. So this gives us the best opportunity to restore heath. It's adjacent to the existing site, and say some of it was heathland only 50 years ago. Right.
So it's quite a dramatic loss then, really.
Yeah, huge percentage loss in the country and in Worcestershire particularly. There would have been heathlands stretching from just north of Worcester right the way up through to Kinver into Staffordshire. Basically the heathland grows on the sandy soils and well-drained soils.
Right, okay. Well, we're going to take a little wander. Okay, so we've just climbed up the hill and we'll sort of climb up quite a steep embankment, and just in front of us is an area that's has it been ploughed or is it?
Yeah, it's been ploughed.
It's been ploughed. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is we've got cultivated plots scattered across the farm, and the idea is to disturb the ground, which is imitating nature really in the activities of what things like wild boar might have done in the past. Wherever sandy ground is disturbed, you get a lot of annual plants growing. That's one of the features of heathlands. So we tend to think of them as farmland plants, so things like poppies, but actually they need disturbed ground. So here we're giving them a helping hand with a tractor. But also smaller animals and livestock can create some disturbance, but the big animals that would really create this are no longer present, so things like bison, wild boar and the rest. So we're giving the plant life a fighting chance. A lot of flowers, a lot of nectar, which helps the invertebrates, and in turn the birds, like at the moment the skylarks that we've got singing around us.
Oh, it's amazing. There's so many skylarks. It's 360 degrees here. I don't think I can ever remember a time where I've heard so many.
Yeah.
It really is. It's like an orchestra, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah.
And they're ground nesters, aren't they? So
that's right, yeah.
So obviously they're liking round here. Do they tend to be in this area, or are they more in the heathland area?
Yeah, they're one of the birds that like really open ground. And there are quite a few heathland birds as well that need open areas as well. So perception of a heathland is it would have a lot of scrub and trees. But again, historically, if there was a lot of grazing animals, so more recent centuries, it would have been livestock, sheep, cattle and the like. But again, in the distant past, it would have been big herbivores. So the idea that it would have been a very closed, treed environment is not true of heathlands. They have been very open, same with grasslands. Hence, these birds have adapted to those conditions over millions of years. Yeah, it's not a recent addition.
Okay. So just turning to our side then, you've just pointed out an embankment that you've put in and a scrape. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, the same idea in the sense of it's disturbed ground. Heathlands, because there should be disturbed ground, attract all sorts of rare mining bees and wasps. And again, this is giving them a helping hand. So it's using an excavator to stir up a bit of the ground and create an embankment. Different bees and wasps require different conditions. So north-facing slopes, south-facing slopes, vertical, flat. So it stirred the ground up. It provides that opportunity for invertebrates to make use of it, and these become focus areas for us to look after carefully as well. So we would perhaps hand weed these areas as well, and also they're focal areas where we can start reintroducing some of the rarer heathland plants as well.
Right. And you were just saying a minute ago as well that because we've got a bit of scrub just by the side of us, an embankment, and there's obviously signs of rabbits. And as this is going to be going out at Easter, can you tell us a little bit about the activities that you're doing to encourage the rabbits?
Of course, yeah. Generally, conservationists like rabbits. They might not have been one of our native animals and perhaps introduced around the time of the Normans or a bit later. But again, what they're doing is replicating the actions of other animals that are no longer doing that job. They graze hard, and if they're in high numbers, create a lawn-like effect, and they disturb the soil again. So it's the same process that with bare ground allows annuals to grow, but they maintain a short sward as well, which actually gives more opportunity to wildflowers to thrive. There's lots of competition between the plants. So again, it actually creates more diversity. Rabbit numbers go up and down with diseases like myxomatosis. At the moment they're going up, but what we're trying to do is draw them further out into the fields so they graze more. So we're creating a few log piles at random scattered around the farm, and the banks that we've been putting in will help them as well.
Right. I know that in my youth, I mean, I grew up in a rural background, and when I was a kid there were so many rabbits, and it doesn't seem as if there are that many now. I mean, have they been in decline for a little while, and are we starting to see a change now in the numbers starting to recover? It's
going to vary across different sites, and there's different diseases that affect rabbits. So on our Heathland site here, they were in good numbers up until about 25 years ago, and then they've plummeted, and it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that their numbers have increased again. But it's kind of natural that animal numbers will go up and down, and in return the plants will sometimes thrive, sometimes some things will get overgrazed. But yeah, so it's trying to help let nature find a balance again.
Okay. So we're sort of stood now on the side of the embankment, looking out towards the railway line and over towards the Devil, Spittleful and the Heathland, and I don't know if you can hear the birds are really singing, but this site has an incredible history, and the landscape has been used by people for many thousands of years. do you know much about the site's history over the millennia?
Yeah, Heathland is very much part of the human landscape. It was used by people a lot, particularly as a place to graze animals and rough graze animals, and it was a tremendous source of useful materials, particularly things like firewood. Particularly if you bear in mind that the richest soils would be farmed and cultivated more often. By default, the poorer, sandier, well-drained soils were then more useful for grazing and harvesting timber from. So there was a tradition of people using them for a long time. And then with this particular site, we're very curious to see, is there any evidence of that historic use, and even to more recent times. A group of volunteers have been looking into the history of the site, and some coming onto site. County archaeologists have given us training in field walking, so when we've cultivated plots on the farm, we've actually had a look at what's in the ground. And we've managed to find evidence going back as far as the Stone Age, of hunter-gatherers being out here. So we found a beautiful knife, beautiful flint knife, about 2 inches long, which is still sharp, and that suggests that people were out here and probably dropped it as well, because you wouldn't lose a decent knife. So we've got evidence on site. Not a great deal, because of course people didn't leave things behind, and then once the farm was built here about 200 years ago, we've suddenly got a massive amount of finds from the farm, particularly pottery and farm machinery as well from about 200 years ago.
Wow. Lots
of horseshoes as well, all sorts of sizes, so shy horses and ponies and the like. So yeah, lots of evidence of how it was heathland in effect for thousands of years. The fact that there wasn't much evidence here, and then 200 years ago it suddenly changes as people try and convert the heathlands, this awful soil, into farmland. And I think this particular site, they really struggled, which gives us hope for a future, because it is a challenging site to farm, but that will make it easier for us to turn it back into heathland.
Right.
So they spent, many recent farmers spent many decades trying to improve the site, adding lime to it, adding fertiliser to it, which again we found evidence of in the soil. But it's our job to try and convert it back to heathland and let the natural processes do their thing.
Well, today, just walking up the hill, I was half expecting it to be quite boggy because of the 2 months of rain that we've just had, and it's bone dry.
Yeah.
It's absolutely incredible. So, you can see, just looking down at the ground, there is no signs of mud or anything, is it? So it must really drain.
Yeah, the soil is really sandy here. So it's come directly from the bedrock, so it's sandstone, so it's an orange sand. But further west towards the river on part of our site, it's a whiter sand, which is alluvial sand as well. So one way or another, it's really well drained. And that gives the conditions for heathland plants to thrive on, whether it's the annuals or the perennial plants like the heather that many people will know, or gorse or broom.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we've just sort of walked up the hill. We've just been watching 5 roe deer up in the hedge line making their way across just under cover. But as we've come to the top of the hill, the field has sort of closed in a bit because we've come across some gorse bushes. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the gorse, and also about the brush and the scrub that we've got around the base of the gorse as well?
Yeah, so gorse is one of the natural heathland plants, and this has come in of its own accord. We've not planted it at all, and it's really good to see. It's one of those plants, because it's so spiny, that is brilliant for nesting birds to use. And since we've taken on the farm and been managing the heath very well to try and encourage scrub like this to grow, we've had an increase in the number of stonechats nesting, which is, I'm sure, directly to do with having lots of gorse, provides a shelter. We're trying to encourage them to grow. When we see small seedlings cropping up, we put a marker post by them, so that if we have a tractor out and we're doing other jobs like flailing, we don't accidentally chop them down. Yeah. So just to help give them a fighting chance, and because we're not cultivating immediately around it or flailing, they're good places for us to put log piles as well, again to encourage the rabbits and other wildlife.
Okay, lovely. Yeah, so we're just walking now up the hill, and there are some cattle on top of the hill, busily grazing away, and they're residents of the site. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the cattle?
Yeah, we have a big herd of Shetland cattle which we use to graze the Heathland sites. It's all part and parcel of a grazing animals project which is run by the Wyre Forest District Council, and we're partners with them and contribute to the management. The rangers do all the day-to-day work, and then we move the animals around the different sites. This particular group, one way or another, they stay on the heath all year, and then get moved about as needed, really.
So we've just sort of walked through a gate and we're just making our way back down to the bottom end of the farm, and we've come across a field which has been quite heavily, I suppose the way to describe it is heavily ploughed. It's got quite a lot of ridges at the moment, and you were saying that it's all to do with planting wildflower seeds. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, so this particular one is just cultivated with the idea that the wild annuals will grow in here. So come end of May, it looks like a sea of red from the poppies, but once you actually go into a field, you realise that there's many more species in here. Another really obvious one would be field pansy, tiny little plant, and also wild radish as well. Again, great sources of nectar. So here we've done it on a whole field scale. We're currently funded with stewardship funding, so that enables us to do this as well, which brings in an income for wildlife. What we're doing across the rest of the farm though is smaller plots, and I think they have a massive advantage that we can then move these plots around the farm, whereas cultivating the same field year on year has some disadvantages. So some of the perennial weeds, so the creeping thistle and the ragwort, are just propagated and the roots are chopped up. So my preference for a future is that we carry on doing the smaller plots rather than the entire field.
Right, okay. So we're just making our way across the cultivated field, and Andy's just picked up a couple of strands of carpet. Now, you wouldn't expect to find carpet in the middle of the field, but there is history attached to that. So Andy, do you want to just tell us about the strands of carpet?
Yeah, it kind of reflects the fact that this is really poor sandy soil. So farmers traditionally would have been trying to fertilise it, so adding manure and the like onto the land, and in more modern times adding artificial fertiliser. But also you need organic matter as well. So besides manure, with all the Kidderminster carpet factories nearby, that was a source of what we call carpet shoddy. So there's been decades of this stuff being added to the fields. And when we first started field walking, trying to see what the history of the site was, we were coming across lots of bits of carpet and had questioned why on earth we were finding it.
Right, okay. So for the listeners, Andy's got two strands of sort of bright red and bright orange carpet in his hand, and when you start to get your eye in and you look down at the ground, you can actually see it all over the place. So that's a really interesting history on the site, and it ties in with the area because Kidderminster is famous for carpet making. So it's amazing. So we've just come right up against the railway track, and just over the other side is the Heathland, and we've actually got some rifle butts and things over there as well, so quite a historical site. But Worcestershire Wildlife Trust have been involved with this landscape for quite a while now. When did the conservation journey here really begin?
Mm-hmm. It started off with volunteers in the early days, back in the 1970s, recognising the site was really important and helping to manage the Heathland. And then in the 1980s, it was designated as a site of special scientific interest. That was when the Trust had the opportunity to then buy the Heathland part of it, and then District Council own and manage another part of the site as well, and also the West Midlands Safari Park as well.
Right.
So that was the start of the journey. And then 20 odd years ago, free fields at Blackstone came up for sale, and we thought that was the first opportunity we should take to actually try and expand the Heathlands back onto land that it had been on historically. And then in 2021 we had the opportunity through the lottery fund to acquire Droppingwell Farm, which is where we're stood now, and this is a much bigger site, 40 hectares.
Right, okay. So you could sort of describe this then as a missing jigsaw piece. So what is this site connected to? The other sites. How does it connect?
That's it. So it's adjacent to the SSI Heathland, and it's adjacent to the earlier land we bought at Blackstone. And then behind us, we've got Burlish Top as well, which is a local nature reserve that's also containing remnant heathland as well. And beyond that as well, there is also a former golf course which the District Council is converting back into a heathland and grassland.
Right.
So collectively, and I mustn't forget West Midlands Safari Park as well, and some private woodland. That's 200 hectares of conservation land.
Wow, this is a big old site then. So projects like this obviously require a lot of support. How was the purchase and restoration made possible?
Yeah, so the purchase is particularly through the lottery fund, and without that we just couldn't do what we're doing. So obviously the price of land is huge, so that's the first point, and then the initial restoration as well, as in setting in the fence lines and the rest to enable us to graze it. We've also got countryside stewardship money as well to help maintain it for a short term, which is really good, and then volunteers to help manage it.
Right. So is it, would you say it was an expensive operation in a way to convert it from farmland back to heathland?
Yeah, the biggest cost is the land acquisition, and then the management of it. It's a slow process. I wouldn't say there's a massive cost involved because it's kind of farming costs. So it's, as I mentioned before, it's using things like tractors and ploughs, topping.
So what role have local supporters, charities and community groups played in making this project happen?
So the project for Dropping Well has also been about community involvement as well, which is really good. And through that we've had local schools come out, we've had staff and volunteers go into schools as well, and the neighbourhood too. So we have benefited from people coming out, learning about the heathlands, which again we hope that they can enjoy learning about nature, and some are actively helping as well, which is brilliant.
Okay, lovely. So we've just sort of walked down a stretch which you've obviously planted out with winter seed, and it's really interesting to see how the soils change from one part of the site to another. As it has been farmland for many years, is really one of the biggest challenges is trying to turn this agricultural land back into heathland. So how do you go about reducing nutrients in the soil?
Yeah, there's several ways that we're doing that, and we've been doing some experiments as well, as other conservationists have done around the country, because it is the converse of what the normal farmer would want to do, of enrich the soil. We're trying to turn it back to a natural soil, which is poorer. With Blackstone, we actually grew oats on rotation for 5 years without adding any fertiliser, and we managed to get quite a good crop off of it for that length of time, but then gradually the weeds crept in as well, so we decided to stop doing that. The other ways that we've been doing it is to graze the land, and that in itself is taking off nutrients as the animals eat the vegetation, and also the small cultivations and the cultivation plots that we've been doing, and then you get the natural leaching of the rainwater taking the nutrients down through the soil. Right.
I know the team creates sort of bare ground sandy mounds in places, and we've already had a look at that. So what wildlife benefits are there from disturbed patches of land?
Yeah, so with the disturbed ground, then we get lots of annuals coming in, which can include the plants that you'd typically find on the heath, whether it's what we think of now as the common poppy, which isn't so common these days, to plants like cudweeds, which are again also really rare. The invertebrates of heaths are really important, and this site over the years has had over 100 different species of ground nesting bees and wasps recorded on it. And then the peripheral areas where it's bare ground but where you've got a little bit of cover as well, reptiles are a really important part of a heathland assemblage as well. So out here we've got common lizards and slow worms. Right.
So I just noticed actually we're right next to the bridge, and we're going to dip underneath the bridge in a minute and go underneath the railway line. And fire risk is obviously a major concern in heathland habitats. How vulnerable are places like this during dry summers?
Yeah, heathlands are very flammable. Any dry ground in the summer can catch fire, of course. So I was just distracted by a skylark just in front of me.
Oh yeah. It's amazing. The microphone won't pick it up, but I have already mentioned this a few times. There are so many skylarks around, and it's like an orchestra of them at the moment. But there are some just in the field right next to us. We're on the other side of the fence, so we're leaving them be and letting them get on with their business. So another thing is climate change. That's obviously another factor that conservationists have to think about. How is it already affecting habitats like this?
Yeah, so on a heathland, the plants and animals generally are adapted to quite dry conditions. But if conditions become more extreme, it becomes more and more challenging. And in a natural environment, even in a natural heathland environment, there should be areas that have water and wetter. And the one thing that we can do is to try and make sure we preserve those or recreate them, and make sure that we do leave areas shady as well. So there might well be a lot of open ground, but there is also shade too.
Right. Okay. Right, so we've come underneath the railway line and we've come through underneath the tunnel, and we've stepped now into the heathland, and this is the Devil's Spittleful, and we're in an area where the trust has come in and has already sort of cleared trees and things. So Andy, could you tell us a little bit about this particular section of the heath?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this particular bit, when the trust was first involved with it, had already become dense scrub, and then over the period of time, decades, this particular area became treed, young woodland, and then 12 years ago we decided that we should restore it. So we took out the trees and took the timber off of site, and it's come back as heathland beautifully. So it's a nice mix now of exactly what we'd imagine. So it's a mixture of bare ground, grasslands, heathers, other scrubs, so things like the gorse, silver birch, hawthorn, but it's quite open. Yeah, right. So obviously we're at the farm, and that's in its early stages of the process. Mm-hmm. And in a moment we're going to go and pop and have a look at some of the more natural heathland. So would it be fair to say that this is kind of like the middle ground between the farm and the natural? Yeah, very much. This is kind of a vision that we want to see for Dropping Well. It would balance out across the whole site, because we imagine that Dropping Well Farm would be a little bit more open, whereas parts of the old heath are a lot more enclosed, a lot more trees. But between the two sites, that gives wildlife a lot of variety. Right,
okay. So it's going to be a wildlife-rich place to be in a few years' time?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've sort of, earlier on we were over the far side of Dropping Well, and we could see the cattle up on top of the hill. And you were just saying now that in this section that we've just walked through, you've got some Soay sheep here. People are not aware of what Soays are. They're a very small breed of sheep, often found up in the Highlands and up on the islands, particularly around Shetland area as well. I know I've seen them on the beaches there. So can you tell us a little bit about the Soays? What are they doing here, and what role do they serve in conserving the landscape?
Yeah, they're a hardy breed, and we use them on the heath because they're very good at eating the scrub as it's coming back up. So when we've got lots of saplings of silver birch and broom, they'll nibble those and keep the landscape more open. The cattle also help, but the combined effort, they eat in different ways, they eat different things, and they make a big difference.
So as we've sort of left the enclosure where the Soay sheep are, we're walking along a path, and it's a cleared area. There's lots of scrub and piles of silver birch that have been cut down, and the trust have been very busy clearing the landscape. And Andy was just telling me that it had got a little bit overgrown because of lockdown and things like that, and now the trust are in and clearing it. But we've just come across a bird box which is quite low down on a birch tree, and so I wanted to ask Andy a little bit more about it and tell us about the species that would inhabit that bird box.
Yeah, this is for redstarts, and they're one of the birds that need a fairly open landscape with scattered trees, which is of course what we have on a heathland, so it's one of the birds that we'd find here. Many others as well, birds that are ground nesters or near ground nesters, so a lot of the warblers, chiffchaffs, willow warblers, garden warblers you'd find out here, potentially even Dartford warbler as well. Right. Where we're kind of at the edge of their range, but that's another bird that likes the scattered scrub and gorse.
Right, yeah.
But for redstarts, what they are is hole nesters, and we don't have many big trees out on the heath, so putting up bird boxes gives them a helping hand as well.
Right. So is there any reason why this one's sort of lower to the ground than perhaps normally when you see them they're way up in the treetops?
It's what they would use. You'll sometimes see redstarts in orchards, so where you get orchard trees and hollows, and of course those hollows can be at all sorts of heights.
Yeah, right, okay, so that makes sense, and so it's kind of reflective of the orchard.
Imitating nature.
as you do. Okay, that's great. Okay, so we're wandering now through the natural heathland, and again the landscape has changed ever so slightly. And one of the things that I read about sand-based heathlands is that there are a lot of reptiles that call them home. So Andy, could you tell us a little bit about the reptiles that live on this site?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got good numbers of common lizards out here, so they're a good indicator that the site is healthy. There must be lots of invertebrates for them to eat. And since we've done the restoration across the site where we've removed young trees, we've now found that they've spread across the whole site, which is fantastic. Yeah. We have got records for slow worms and grass snakes on the site as well. And then the one that other people often ask me about is adders, which certainly were here in the 1980s, but the site had become very fragmented and there was tiny little heathland glades hanging on in between the young woodland that was developing. In 1977, I think it was 1977, there was a very big fire that went across the entire site, and that was probably the death knell of them here. And then the surrounding land's unsuitable, so they seem to have vanished from the area.
Right, that's a real pity. But it's quite interesting though that we're sort of looking at the landscape. We looked at Droppingwell Farm, we've looked at the bits in between, and we talk a lot with the Trust about connectivity. How does all of this site, both Devil's Spittleful and Droppingwell and Blackstone, how do they all come together to create part of the connected network?
Yeah, so on a site like this, it's really important that the open heathland landscapes do connect up, because, for example, if we took the lizards, they need sunlit, openish areas with some cover in order to get from A to B, and hence the importance of connecting habitat together. So whether it's within our own land holding or whether it's with our neighbours' land holding, that we need to make sure there's gaps and corridors that animals can move through.
Right. So going back to Droppingwell Farm and just having sort of looking at that at the beginning of its journey, how many years do you think it's going to take from where it is now to being something like this heathland here? Yeah,
I think we're well on the way to getting there. It's surprising that on some of the hilltops and areas of disturbed ground that you will find the plant life and the invertebrate life that we also have on the heath. But some of the obvious things take a little bit longer, such as the scattered scrub, but as we've seen, there is some of that coming in of its own accord. We are giving it a helping hand in a few places, so we have planted, or transplanted I should say, some scrub off the heath onto the farm. One of the obvious plants that's missing is heather. But that is actually just one species that's found on a heathland. A lot of people assume that is what a heathland is, it's just heather. It is only one plant. That is one that we will have to give a helping hand. I'm sure it would get across there if we left nature to its own devices, but it might take hundreds of years. The prevailing wind is going in the wrong direction, and there's a railway line and a big embankment in the way, so I suspect it will take a long time for the seed to find its own way there. So we've been, with the help of volunteers, raking up the leaf litter below the heather plants that will have seed in. We've also asked a local nursery to grow on some plants for us from seed, so we can plant some plug plants, and that visually I think will make people think, it's a heathland once we've got some heather. But to all intents and purposes, the plants and the birds and the insects I think seem to think it is. We've got stone chats breeding on the farm, feeding out there. We've got yellow hammers out there. We've got yellow hammers and stone chats on the heath. So I don't think they're quite so bothered.
So we're stood now in the Devil's Spittleful, and it's a really interesting name, and I'm dying to find out why it is called that. Because I've been trying to wrap my brains to try and work out whether it's something to do with mythology, or whether it's to do with the shape of the landscape, or because there's a Devil's Punch Bowl on the Brecon Beacons. Yep. And I was just wondering, because I know about the myths attached to that. So what is the story behind the name?
Yeah, well, George Griffiths, who lived in Bewdley, immortalised it in the 18th century, and he wrote a very, very lengthy poem about the story of the Devil's Spittleful. But he does say that he bases his entire poem on the local fable and tradition of the area, so it is an old story. The really short version of that is that the devil really disliked the Christian people of Bewdley, and he wanted to kill them. And the simplest way of doing that was to get a spadeful, or a spittleful, which is its other name, of rock, and block the River Severn and drown the people of Bewdley.
Right.
So he got his spade, or his spittle, and he dug up some rock. And in his version, it came from Italy. But in fact, he said that is the only thing he changed in the local tale. And that the devil had a spadeful of rock and bumped into a local cobbler who knew what he was about. And they sat down and had a beer together here on the heath. And the cobbler asked him what he was going to do. And the devil had actually said, "How far is it to the River Severn?" So the cobbler lied and said it was a very, very long way, and used his bag full of shoes to highlight that he'd worn out all these shoes to get to this point.
Right.
So the devil was rather nonplussed and dumped his load of rock here, hence the devil's spittleful.
Right.
But going back to what you said earlier, the name devil tended to be used at times of turbulence in British history, and some of those sites in Sussex are really, really ancient and probably date back to when Christianity first arrived in this country, so 6th century or so.
Right.
And this is on the early maps as well, sort of 17th century maps. The other turbulent time is later on, 18th century, so there's a high chance that this is a much, much older name.
Yeah.
And in fact, the original name in Domesday is Tuldesborg, which translates as Rock Mountain. So there's a high chance that it was here, time of 1066 as well.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. So thank you for that. So it's been lovely today to take a walk around the site with Andy. We have been over onto Droppingwell Farm, and we've had a look at all of the work that's taking place here to transform what is now blank fields into heathland. And we've also taken a wander over and we've been to the Devil's Spittleful and we've had a look there. So Andy, thank you so much for taking us around, and it's been absolutely fascinating, and hopefully I'll be back here again at some point to look in depth at some of the history of the site, which is unbelievable. So yeah, thank you for giving us your time.
You're welcome, really appreciate it.
Cheers, thank you. And that brings us to the end of today's walk here at Droppingwell Farm. What's really struck me is just how much potential there is in a landscape like this. At first glance it might feel quiet, but when you spend a little bit of time here, it starts to reveal itself. You start to see the wildlife and the movement and the sense that something is slowly returning. And it's been a real privilege to walk the site with Andy and hear firsthand about the care, the patience and the long-term thinking that goes into restoring a place like this. From the early stages here at Droppingwell Farm through to the more established restoration at Blackstone and on to the rich heathland at the Devil's Spittleful, you begin to see the bigger picture. This isn't just about one site, it's about lots of parcels of land that are being reconnected in an entire landscape. And for me there's a real sense of amazement, not just at the wildlife that we've seen along the way, but at the depth of history that lies beneath our feet. It's something we've only just touched on today, and it's a story that I'll be coming back to in a future episode, maybe later this year. And when you hear that history, you start to realise something. This isn't a new story. The Trust has been here for years, quietly caring for this landscape, protecting it, helping it recover, letting nature find its way back. What is new, though, is the next chapter. The addition of Droppingwell Farm and the restoration work now taking shape has only been possible thanks to the support of some incredible organisations. Funding has come from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Seven Waste Services, the Bannister Charitable Trust, the Rowlands Trust and the Helen Mackiness Charitable Trust, alongside the generosity of Trust members and supporters. So really this isn't just a conservation project, it's a shared effort, a collective belief that places like this really matter. And that feels worth pausing on, because none of this happens by accident. So to everyone who's played a part in bringing this project to life, a big thank you. So if you'd like to find out more about the work that's happening here, you can visit the Worcestershire Wildlife Trust website. We've included the link in the description. For now though, as we head into the Easter season, I just want to wish you all a very happy Easter, wherever you are. I hope you get the chance to step outside and connect with nature in your own way. So thanks for listening, and I will see you on the next one. So from me, goodbye.